아,
지금 되는 건데 저기서 좀 붙은 거라서 그런 거.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin the roundtable session discussion for today's conference. With Professor Kim Tae-hwan of the Korea National Diplomatic Academy as a moderator, today's roundtable will proceed under the topic of New Emerging Trends, New Horizons in Korean Diplomacy. As our panelists, we will have Professor Lee Kun at Seoul National University, Professor Chai Chui-hong of Fudan University, Professor Banzai Hiroyuki of Waseda University, Vice President Christopher Han at SAP App House Asia Center, and Director General for Climate Change, Energy, Environment, and Scientific Affairs Bureau at MOFA, Kwon Se-jung. So please welcome our panelists on the stage with a big round of applause.
Thank you very much, and thank you particularly for you introducing our panels on behalf of myself. Thank you. I'm Professor Tae-hwan Kim. I'm so much honored today to play the role of moderator of this important roundtable session. I think some of audiences left earlier. Then I should say that those who left earlier actually are missing the core essence of the whole day conference. All right. Well, we've come through a long day today. We have three very interesting and very productive sessions today. And then the last session will be a little bit different in terms of format. It will be a roundtable. So there will be no, dragging long presentation. Okay, it's going to be a questions and answers session. Basically, the task given to us to this panel is to assess the impact of new technologies on diplomacy. So the focus is very narrow, and for the purpose of having a little bit effective discussion and pointed discussion, I would rather divide the impact dimension, impact of new technologies on diplomacy, the impact dimension into three subdimensions. Meaning that I basically have today for this panel three questions. The first question is the contextual dimension of diplomacy. So what kind of impact new technologies will have on the diplomatic context, the context or environment, if you like, in which we practice diplomacy, okay? That's my first question. And the second question will be what I call instrumental dimension. What elements of new technologies could we embrace in our diplomacy in a new era? I mean, how possibly could we integrate elements of new technologies to the toolkit, to the conventional toolkit of diplomacy? Okay, that's my second question. And the third question, what I would call a strategic dimension of diplomacy. So by definition, strategy is meant by definition a combination of means and ends. So in such a radically changing context and embracing, utilizing a new elements of technologies, possibly what is to be done for us to achieve a particular foreign policy goals. And when I say foreign policy goal, I particularly have in mind to facilitate the international cooperation and collaboration in a new technological era. So I have three questions, meaning that we're going to have 3 rounds of discussions, one by one, okay? And I'd like to ask you to keep your answer or comment per question up to 5 minutes, okay? Maximum 5 minutes. And then if we do have some time, we're going to open the floor so that we could have some questions from audiences. And the last point that I would like to, this is a very important point to make, is that, you know, the title of our session is New Emerging Trends, New Horizons in Korean Diplomacy. I mean, the second part of the title of this roundtable session is coming directly from the grand theme of today's conference, New Horizons in Korean Diplomacy. What does that mean? I believe strongly, I firmly believe that we collectively, this panel, are obligated to open some new horizon in this panel, through this panel, for Korean diplomacy. So when you make a comment or answer to my question, please don't forget to focus on Korean diplomacy. Okay, that's my logistical comment. So why don't we start my first question? The first question is, as I said, the contextual dimension of diplomacy, the impact of technology, new technologies' impact on contextual dimension. For example, basically what is happening or what will be happening through the fourth industrial revolution to diplomatic environment, diplomatic context. We all know that we have some societalization of diplomacy as opposed to state-centered diplomacy, thanks to the rapid rise of non-state actors, greatly empowered by technological breakthrough. Okay, sort of things. So in a sense, you know, the public dimension of diplomacy has been greatly expanded. So public, both domestic and international, global citizens, foreign publics, they no longer are simply passive audiences of diplomacy. They are actually active, proactive participants, sometimes subject and or collaborator of diplomacy. So in that sense, what is happening, and what should we do to adapt our diplomacy to the changing environment to meet the challenges imposed by technological changes? Could we start, Professor Lee? Is it okay to start?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, why not? Thank you very much. I think we are going to see a sea change in global politics because of the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution. The buzzword for the Fourth Industrial Revolution is I mean, there are many, but if I have to choose one, it is platform. Platform is an analogy that people borrowed from the concept of train station platform. And on the platform, people do a lot of things. They meet their friends. They do a lot of interactions with other people there. So platform is just a playground, or is a venue where people do transactions and interactions. And previously, the platform over which the nation states or diplomats or people interact with one another was basically land. So on the land we build houses, we do agriculture, We fight wars on the land. We travel on the land. We ride horses on the land. But because of the digital technology, internet network, now the platform has become the so-called digital network. So that is the sea change. Now people, of course, we are still using the land-based platform, but with the help of, with the arrival of the fourth industrial revolution, now we are doing a lot of interactions and transactions on the digital internet platform. And this is very important because in the future, I think perhaps very near future, many of the things that we have done in the past will be done on the digital platform. And the nature of this digital platform is that there is the so-called network externality. The country that dominate the digital platform will collect enormous amount of data, which is called big data. And when you have a very advanced computing technology, you will have very advanced artificial intelligence technology. And with the analysis of the big data and deep learning of artificial intelligence technology, you can make a lot of things possible that human beings were not able to do. And at the same time, you can monitor the data and you can control and manipulate the human beings and interactions of many different entities. And the problem is that once you are connected to this digital network, because of the so-called network effect of network externality, it is very, very difficult to make an exit from this internet network. And the thing is, I think this was discussed in the previous session, the thing is that the largest internet digital network, which is owned by a country, is the Chinese digital network. And Chinese digital network is, unfortunately, even if it looks very open, because of the monopoly effect of the digital network, it becomes increasingly very closed. And once you are connected to this Chinese internet network, because of the utility of the network, you will continuously use the Chinese internet network. And as discussed in the previous session, many of the non-Chinese companies are not able to take advantage of this internet network, like Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, Netflix. So these are non-Chinese companies. And the fact of the matter is that the digital population in China is about 0.7 billion people, and they will produce a lot of data. And Chinese technology in artificial intelligence is a lot more advanced than many other countries, and it is considered more advanced than the USA. And one of the most important technology in this age of fourth industrial revolution is data protection technology. And China is making huge investment in this data technology, protection technology, quantum communication, and so on and so forth. I mean, this technology goes up in the space, and that's why space battle is becoming more important. So in the future, there is going to be a bifurcation of the world into two different closed, incompatible data network economic blocks. One is the Chinese network, and the other is perhaps American or non-Chinese digital network. And the security issues will be the protection of, in the past, it was land-based platform, but in the future, it's going to be the digital net-based platform. The international security will be done under the assumption that the armies, navies, or the hackers, they need to protect this digital network. And a lot of things will change. The concept of the security, the strategies, diplomatic tools, the issues, to which digital network other countries need to be connected. These are going to be very, very important issues, and nobody discusses these issues. So on that note, I think the IFANS is doing a fantastic job, selecting this issue as this year's forum's topic.
Thank you very much. Can you please turn off?
Sure.
Thank you very much. We cannot overemphasize too much of the importance of the rise of a digital platform. That's what Egan said. But he also at the same time insisted that China has the largest digital network in the world. Not only that, but also is rapidly closing the largest digital network. It could be a little bit, provocative, well, depending on perspectives. So, what is your response to Professor Lee, Professor Chai?
Should I respond to you or Professor Lee? Yeah. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to give my thanks to KND and my friends for the invitation to this wonderful event. This is my second time in this room, so I am so happy to be back, and thanks a lot. And then you talk about the context of diplomacy in the fourth industrial revolution. I think that first of all, we should think about the general globalization context in this aspect. So I actually prepared a PowerPoint presentation, but I don't want to be a bothering person at the end of the day, so I decided to draw that presentation and talk about these discussion points. And I think that I would like to give you some numbers first. Take China as an example. China now, in this globalization era, China now has established diplomatic relations with 178 countries. So in the world, there are altogether 197 countries. And so we have diplomatic relations with 178. And then we established strategic partnership with 67 countries. And then China signed more than 300 international treaties or conventions. And then another number is that yearly in 2017, the Chinese embassies and consulates overseas dealt with more than 73,000 those security events. That means every 7 minutes, China has to deal with one, security events overseas. And then every year, China receives a lot of visitors and Chinese citizens going abroad. That number is about 146 million people going abroad every year. That means about more than 1/10 of Chinese people were going abroad. So all these numbers really proves one thing: the diplomatic task is exploding. So this is a great, I think, context we have to consider about. This is one: the volume is exploding, and then secondly, I think that the speed of change is also accelerating, because everything is changed, especially with the digital revolution. So everything is changing so quickly. And then with all this general background, I think for the diplomacy, there are several features for the environment or context. First, it is becoming a more open and transparent. As we all know that in this digital era, everyone can voice their idea through online, especially for China. It's becoming more and more obvious, because China used to be a closed society, and diplomacy used to be a closed-door meeting, or those specialist diplomats. But now, with the internet and also a digital era coming, so everyone can get involved in diplomacy. So it's becoming open and transparent. That is also because everyone is now more and more concerned with their own interests. So this is one feature. The other feature is because of the digital era, the diplomacy needs to act quickly. As I say, the change is coming so quickly. So the diplomacy response needs to be very quick. Especially in such a big society as China, we have such a big population. If online event developed, so the result will be significant. So the diplomacy needs to react quickly, and I said it's now a kind of instant diplomacy. So every country needs to think about this, because we have to maybe kind of crisis control or crisis response, is things like that. And then another third feature maybe is that the blurred boundary between internal affairs and external affairs. Something internal in the past might not come across the border, but now with the internet, even China has some censorship. Still, those news will come abroad and come in and out of the border. So everything internal can become international, and those international accidents will also maybe cause some responses domestically in China. So I think this, the whole context of diplomacy now is changing. But I would like to say that we are talking about the fourth industrial revolution. I would like to say that the third and the fourth cannot be divided, because the fourth industrial revolution can be seen as a continuation and deepening of the third industrial revolution. So I think all these features will go on. And answering in response to your, well, I'm honored to be the only Chinese citizen for the panelists, but I do not represent Chinese government. I can only represent myself. So I heard many panelists and presenters, including Professor Li, talked about China. I really think that China is a beneficiary from the globalization. And in China, we usually say that China is not a system breaker. It's a constructive participant. We would like to say, officially say, constructive participant. We are participating, but we are not changing, but we want to do some constructions, maybe some additions, maybe some a little bit improvement, like that. So, so we don't think that we are breaking rules or we are setting up new system, new trade system, a new internet. That's impossible. Internet is means www, World Wide Web. So without the World Wide Web, I think it's impossible to do this international business. And even in China, I think that we have a lot of maybe you are talking about those state-owned enterprises, but for private-owned private enterprises, I think it's doing a great job for globalization. For myself, my family is doing international business, so I know that a little bit, right? Yeah, I end here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your shrewd and very wise response. Why don't we go over to Professor Banzai? Could you please give us your, because your expertise in public international law,
yes,
legal perspective on the contextual dimension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. As Professor Kim indicated, the points on which we shall touch. So I would like to first of all, I would like to mention about the impact and the international cooperation in the context of the new trends of this session. So today I would like to approach this matter from the perspective of security as one of the core concepts of international law, concretely speaking, applicability of international law to cybersecurity. The cyber issues are pressing for answer to a question about how traditional concepts of international law shall be adapted to new emerging trends in international community. Traditional security has a limited scope of political independence and territorial integrity expressed in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter of the United Nations. Considering some recent cases, however, the threats to cybersecurity extend from cyber crimes to cyber attacks, parallel with the level of armed attack, like one against critical infrastructures, for example, against military installations, oil pipelines, dams, electric system, and medical system, and so on. In addition, they come to include the threat to the decision-making process of a state, such as several kinds of activities to interfere into the election and vote process to manipulate the public opinion, as currently reported in the US. The debate for the effective legal framework on cybersecurity has just begun, though the threats mentioned above are now becoming apparent and tangible. And according to the Tarim Manual 2.0 of 2017, the law of state responsibility as one of applicable rules of general international law shall play an important role in ensuring international peace and cooperation. Among them, the principle of due diligence is considered as a useful regulatory means to implement particular obligations to secure national critical infrastructure vulnerable to attacks. Under the principle of due diligence, states are obliged to refrain from internationally harmful omissions resulting in significant transboundary harm, also when such harm is to be the result of an online activities initiated from within or translated through state jurisdiction and its power or control. But it may be difficult to perceive such harm as the injury caused by internationally wrongful act. In 2001 articles on the law of state responsibility by the International Law Commission of the United Nations, the injury is comprehensively defined as any damage, material or moral, but it excludes merely abstract concerns or general interests of a state. The threats mentioned above now reach all three layers of cyberspace. In other words, as the Professor Lee mentioned, I'd like to call the cyberspace, not platform, but that you mean that cyberspace, I think. That cyberspace is composed of physical layer of hardware, a logical layer of software, and social layer of individuals and groups using the soft and hardwares. The traditional concept of damage covers certain portion of the threats to those three layers, but it can be highly hard to establish the existence of concrete material or moral damage caused by, for instance, the interference to election and the vote process to manipulate the public opinion in a state. And also it may be impossible to specify a conduct in question attributable to a state committed in cyberspace allowed to act in an anonymous form. Therefore, it is much more important to prevent the threats from actualizing rather than post-damage remedies. This can be achieved by particular security obligations put onto private companies and executed within their internal security policies, and those national laws need to reflect a well-informed international consensus supported by solid technical knowledge, one reflecting individual economic and technological capabilities of each state. From this perspective, it may be essential to promote the efforts to make dialogue for capacity building against cybersecurity in a region or global level. Japan now takes a positive position to advance such a dialogue with the nations of ASEAN, and in other areas, the mutual exchange of information has been made through the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and Organization of American States. And the UK has tackled the cyber issues within the framework of Commonwealth. In this field, Japan and Korea and Japan will be able to cooperate, I think, will be able to cooperate, contribute to upgrading the level of cybersecurity in Asian region. How do you think about I'd like to know, how do you think about the eminent professors from Korea? How do you think about the possibility of the bilateral cooperations between Japan and Korea for upgrading the level of cybersecurity in Asian region? Thank you very much.
Great. You are actually going in advance of our schedule. You already touched upon the very important question of collaboration, particularly between Korea and Japan. Well, thank you for that. And Dr. Han, well, your expertise in innovation and transformation and innovation. So
Yes.
from that particular perspective, what is happening now in the diplomatic context?
Yes. Well, first of all, I also like to thank the KNDA for this invitation to join this conference. As you pointed out, I'm the sole representative of industry here, and so I like to shed a little bit of the industry perspective on this topic of the fourth industrial revolution and diplomacy. I'm part of a company called SAP, which is in the enterprise software space, and we are a proponent and an enabler of the fourth industrial revolution for our clients. And yet today, I think as I listen to the conversations now and the conversations that have taken place earlier, I think I'd like to perhaps depart from the talk about the digital technology and move perhaps and put the focus on the why or the purpose of all this, and that is it not the pursuit of a common vision for human well-being? And from that perspective, when we talk about diplomacy, it seems to be, at its best, nations coming together to pursue this common vision of mutual benefit, human wellness. And the technologies of its various kinds are simply enablers to help achieve that human wellness. And right now, the thing that I would like to see more of is the conversation about what it means for Korea. What is the vision that Korea has in terms of defining human wellness, not only for its own nation, but for the region and perhaps even on the global stage? Being fully aware of all the technological trends and advances that are happening around us, and using that as enablers to perhaps redefine the kind of conversations that we can have between nations. So that's one. And the other thing for context, and this is a matter of reality, and that is the trends within the fourth industrial revolution are concretely affecting the world of business. And I see that. As a company, we see that. And it will create new winners and losers. That's certain, because the rules of the games are changing for many industries. You can come up with countless examples of companies just a few years ago or a decade ago were household names. For example, in Korea, I came to Korea 5 years ago, and Samsung phones are everywhere, right? In the United States, when the smartphone, or not a smartphone, but when cell phones first came out, Nokia was the one that was most ubiquitous. And now you hardly hear of Nokia. Motorola was also very popular. You don't see too many of those either. It's the iPhones and Samsungs, the LGs, and Huawei phones, right? That's one simple example. But a more local example that I became aware of recently on this topic about how we need to frame the conversation and the understanding of common well-being is something that's going on with the taxi industry here in Korea. And the taxi industry is against the government allowing carpools. In other words, individuals who own cars to operate them, to be connected with consumers and to give them rides. And I remember seeing this news article or this TV news broadcast, which framed it as survival versus convenience. And meaning survival of the taxi industry versus convenience of consumers. But that's absolutely a needless framing of the situation. In fact, it could be rather harmful because it is pitting two sides against each other into a zero-sum game. Rather, if we look at this from a much more holistic perspective of human well-being and how technology can enable this, well, why is there even a need for carpools? Well, people want ready access to mobility in a convenient way at an affordable price. And taxis work most of the time, but they don't work all of the time. And that's why there's this need. But what if we're able to look at taxis not simply as a business, but as a large set of moving vehicles, these moving assets? And when you look at it that way, you realize that, wait a second, during certain times of the day, a lot of these so-called moving assets are sitting idle. So in other words, they're underutilized. Well, why are they underutilized? So there's a slew of problems, both managerial and technical, but what we can do is take all of those underutilized assets, use technology to increase the utilization of those assets in a very efficient way, and employ professional drivers who are wanting to do this as a living, and provide a much cheaper way to, of providing convenient and accessible mobility service. Now, whether you call that a taxi service or give it some other name, it doesn't matter. But the key point here is when you take a holistic view, when you take a global view of this single problem, you realize that there are a lot of idle cars, taxis, and you have a lot of people who are willing to drive them professionally in a safe manner. And so this problem can be solved. And when you do that, perhaps there's no need for carpooling because everyone's already satisfied with access to cheap, convenient mobility. So that's one example, a very specific example, to really make the point that between nations, we have to act in a similar manner.
Good.
We have to come up with a shared vision of human wellness, truly global, and really define what that means. And in this world, it has to be something that is sustainable. It has to be something that addresses a sense of fairness about resource, both production and consumption. And with that common value, use our technologies of various kind to pursue that. And I think that frame and that kind of conversation is something that needs to be at the forefront of diplomacy.
Well, thank you very much. I think my understanding of your argument is that that is actually one of the key tasks diplomacy is facing with in the new era of technological revolution, which is framing how to reconcile between the losers and winners of technologies. That's it. I think that's we're gonna get back to the point later. And Director General, are there any particular changes that matter particularly for Korean diplomacy these days?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. I think it's a very meaningful event, and then also we can think about what directions we will take in future diplomacy decision making. And first of all, I'd like to think about how to define fourth industrial revolution, but it's a very elusive concept, so I'd like to identify some features of fourth industrial revolution. First one, I think it is uncertainty, increasing uncertainty, because it's brought about by disruptive technologies, so nobody knows where to go. And second feature is digitalization. Digitalization brings about decentralization and also engage many stakeholders together. So an open platform is very important. And third one is super connectivity. It connects everyone, everything, every human being. So it can be represented by Internet of Things, IoT, or chain of things, or chain of energy, whatever named. Anyway, so connectivity, super connectivity is a very main feature. And the fourth one is sharing something, sharing ideas, sharing know-how, sharing know-where, sharing economy. That kind of sharing something is one of the main features. So that's why many people craze for Facebook and Facebook stories and KakaoTalk. So many, it fulfills the demand the desire of human being to express themselves. And so what, with regards to the contextual dimension, I think, so in these features can impact on the diplomatic arena. First, when we think about the participants, many, not only state actors, but also non-state actors together, and the private sectors, NGOs and experts and civil society activists together. They are very strong voices towards government policies. That's one of the challenges. The other one, the second is we should change the way of thinking, a way of designing. So it's a designing thinking, because how to design some governance or some policy making infrastructure. So designing thinking is one of the important challenge. And the third one is how to identify the people's minds, because Korean government seeks for people-centric diplomacy, but how to know the people's mind. So we should be more focused on mind mining, like data mining. So mind mining is another how to follow up the people's changing minds of the general public. And also that means it needs to be more, put more assets on crowdsourcing of public people, general public. And also the other last one is the fourth industrial revolution is sometimes digital hegemony problems. So who will take up the digital network or digital platform, digital standardization? Whose technology will be standardized? That's one important challenge. Having said that, the second dimension is the tool, the instrument dimension. So everybody talks about quick to act, so quick diplomacy. So instant diplomacy is important, but instant diplomacy is not an improvised diplomacy. It's so totally different. But how to identify, how to collect the people's minds and also filter into diplomatic arena, the very detailed process. So that kind of process can be complemented by digital technology. Digital technology can be epitomized as DNA. That means data, big data, and network, and AI. So DNA is one of the important process of digital technology. So in the process, we should be more focused on the people's minds and people's opinions. And so the Korean government is considering, for our bureau, is considering a new science diplomacy that is will set up a diplomacy lab. So it's a laboratory style decision making, but it's a preliminary stage. But we should report the upper stage. However, we need some sort of a regular forum, regular platform to communicate each other, including experts and government sectors together, and also, if possible, maybe young experts or young students together, future generations. And that kind of agile diplomacy, should require reforming, reorganizing our digital diplomacy infrastructure. How to make smart diplomacy? That is a big challenge. In that sense, I should like to explain three categories of science diplomacy. First one is diplomacy for science. Second one is diplomacy for science. And third one is diplomacy in science, or diplomacy with science. The three categories. But science, diplomacy for science, already in the first time we pursued this kind of strategy from the first start. That it can be first thing, starting point is concluding science and technology cooperation agreement. That's Ministry of Foreign Affairs work. And then the meeting of Committee of Science Technology can be done mostly by Minister of ICT. So we have collaboration is very important. And science diplomacy for science for diplomacy is already many cases. Sino-U.S. relations normalizing the relations before normalizing their ties. Their science diplomacy was exerted, and also U.S. and Russia also. But we should think about how to engage North Korea. Sometimes we need some science. Diplomacy, science for diplomacy is one of the important elements. And third category is science in diplomacy. This third category is more and more important. For example, everybody is very sensitive to the particular matter problems. China, Korea domestically also, we try to strengthen our policy measures to reduce contaminating gases and emissions of other many sources. And also we should cooperate with China, because China is also they're emitting many sources, diversity of gases in our atmosphere. So in that sense, I think we need some bilateral channel, but also for a multilateral channel. Fortunately, last October, we succeeded to agreed to launch the NIACAP, the Northeast Asia Clean Air Partnership. It is done by NIASPEC, Northeast Asia Sub-Regional Program for Environmental Cooperation. Is composed of 6 countries, including North Korea, Mongolia, and China, and Russia, Japan. Altogether, they agreed to launch NIACAP. So NIACAP, so important element of NIACAP is SPC, the Science Policy Committee. That means, science and policy makers together, the interface between the two sectors, the committee, they analyze the scientific impacts of the emission gases, how to move across the border, and then how to change, and then how it can change into another the destination from source to receptor, how to change it. That kind of research done by scientific experts, but they should write up for the suggestion for policymakers, because policymakers do not know the details on science. So that kind of the Science Policy Committee is one of the examples. We can utilize the science technologies, especially digital technology, because you can track the movement of gases from IoT or whatever. In real-time monitoring is possible. But now the China creates different borders, so practically it's very difficult. But we try to connect with the 2 countries, their technologies. So that of the policy of science in diplomacy. This kind of strategy means, I think, is one of the cases. But for strategic dimension, we should think about. I should briefly touch on the 3 powers.
Director General Kwon, why don't
Okay.
we stop there?
Okay.
We're going to go over to strategy a little bit later, couple minutes later. I mean, thank you very much, Director General Kwon. I mean, taking very specific example of Korean diplomacy, he actually blurred the lines between first dimension and second dimension. So we already smoothly and naturally, spontaneously move to the second dimension, instrumented dimension. Well, actually, when I say instrumented dimension, I have 2 points in mind, the small points. The first point is what sorts of elements of new technologies could be embraced in diplomacy. That's first one. And the second point is that if we do so, do we expect some kind of transformation in the institution of diplomacy? When I say institution of diplomacy, that means a set of practices, norms, culture, organizations. So 2 points. You don't have to deal with both points altogether. Just depending on your preference, you could concentrate on either or. So why don't we start this time from Dr. Han? Probably cultural or organizational innovation, renovation, hopefully in Korean diplomacy.
I'm going to speak off the cuff here because you want me to address some specific technologies about?
Yeah. That could be, incorporated into new forms of diplomacy.
New forms of diplomacy.
Big data is one example. Digital platforms are another. I think that you don't know much more than myself.
Well, so one of the interesting things about the so-called fourth industrial revolution is that it's really, and I think it really is a departure from the third. And so you mentioned about it's just an extension, but one of the ways it's different is that even though it's the dawn of computers and information technology that has enabled this, one of the differentiating factors is that it's really a convergence now between digital, the physical, and even the biological. And we've not seen this kind of convergence to the scale and scope before. And what's astonishing is the pace and the scale of this innovation that is happening. It's really mind-boggling if you think about it. And so what this is creating is a myriad of different business models that we've not had before. So it's not just simply existing companies and existing business models becoming more efficient and doing their jobs better and creating more and improved products that already exist, but they're creating new services and new products and, again, new business models that never existed before. And so one of the challenges from a government perspective, you talked about the institution of government as those who are doing diplomacy, is that from an internal market perspective, I think one of the things that needs to be addressed is the role of government, particularly with regards to regulations. And so because these are new business models, the government needs to come up to speed very quickly on how to treat these new business models. And not doing so can actually hamper innovation. And in fact, we've seen cases of that. Yeah. So we don't want irrelevant, outdated regulations hampering the progress of these new business models. And of course, this happens also across boundaries. Other countries are having to grapple with the same problems. And so in the realm of diplomacy, this is one area that could be of common interest. How do we sort of align and improve different regulations that needs to be coordinated, because businesses don't act now only in one single national market. Oftentimes, they are able to because of technology, and we mentioned about the role of the internet and so forth, and also because of requirements for scale, they do plan on serving the global market from the beginning in many cases. And so from a diplomacy perspective, from a government perspective, that's what new businesses would require.
Thank you. So I'd like to talk about the issues that Professor Kim indicated from the institutional aspect, because in order to implement the diplomacy fully, the organization, national organization with a unified power to deal with the cyber issues is needed. There may be high capability to protect cybersecurity in Japan from a technological perspective, but there are certain problems from institutional and legal aspects. It is pointed out that Japan has to establish the more solid system of cybersecurity, especially taking into account that in 2020 the Olympic will be held in Tokyo. So on the other hand, in Europe and the US, there is an integrated agency of cybersecurity with a comprehensive power and control. In Japan, National Center of Incident Readiness and Strategy for Cybersecurity, the NISC, was established in just 2015, and it has certain competence to monitor, analyze, advise, assist, plan, and coordinate the information activities and the systems of administrative organs and other government bodies. Yeah, no. It is a kind of the agency, independent agency of Japan, but it does not include the competence to protect the cybersecurity of Japan as a whole. So, under present condition, each administrative organ shall be engaged in the protection of cybersecurity within its own function. The NISC does not have any power to direct or instruct in emergency situation, and their capacity extends only to administrative organs and other government bodies, not to critical infrastructure. Therefore, it is now suggested by the civil organization and the NGO that the Cybersecurity Agency, CSA, should be established, expansively organizing and strengthening the existing NISC. And the new CSA shall be planned to have a unified responsibility to protect life, person, and the property of Japanese people from cyber attacks. So this is relevant to the one more my question to Korean colleagues. I think Korea is one of countries with the most advanced electric and the information system. And at the same time, it may always have to be ready for cyber attacks from North Korea. So I'd like to know whether there is a unified agency for cybersecurity and how Korea now deals with the issues of cybersecurity. Yeah, my question is not close to the Korea, and my question is open to China and the other, the US and the other European countries. So please instruct me about these things. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, I don't have any expertise in that cyber field. So, but I'll do my research and let you know. Okay, later. Professor Chai, you are actually cybersecurity specialist.
But I would like to first respond to your questions. And you want to talk about the practices, new practices in diplomacy and elements, technological elements that might be applied in diplomacy. I think that I read some foreign media mention that China is now designing a kind of AI machine for diplomacy, actually recently. But I myself, did not see that in China. But I would like to say that what is the real benefit of the fourth industrial revolution or AI, for example? It can, first it can read huge amounts of data. This is the most important, because human brains, and we have only 2 eyes, of course. We have enough limited energy, limited time, to read all those data with the, satellite and every camera around every corner collecting those data. It's impossible to do this data collection, data reading, data mining by man. So this is the first advantage. And then secondly, for AI, it does not have hatred, of course, does not have love, and does not have fear. So when, in diplomacy, some mistakes are made because of human feelings, sometimes. So with an AI assistance in diplomacy, this kind of error might be avoided. So all these are, I think, it's our advantages of AI or fourth industrial revolution. And then for the elements of in technology that can be applied in diplomacy, I think first we have to set up a kind of a database, because data is the most important thing for the fourth industrial revolution. And then what kind of database for diplomacy? In my mind, I think that there are different kinds of. Maybe we have to collect the data of my own country and of other, diplomatic relations country. And also we should collect, diplomatic data. But of course, because the blurring of, different fields, and every field, high politics or low politics, can be spread into diplomacy. So those non-diplomacy data should also be collected, maybe including maybe economy, immigrants, all kinds of data. And then another, data, I have to mention that we should not only collect those static data. We should, collect, dynamic data, because it's always changing. So first thing that comes into my mind is we should set up a database. Yeah, and then secondly, I think that we should design those diplomacy support system, like AI. But it might be, difficult, but it's coming. I think that I think that not only for decision making, but also maybe in diplomacy, for example, for the security, protection. For example, when a foreign leader comes to visit China, how to make sure he or she is safe. Maybe we can use big data to look around the environment, and also maybe even for his transportation line. In China, when a foreign leader, national leader comes to visit, usually some streets are blocked. But this really arouses a lot of sentiments among public. So if there's, with the aid of big data or AI, maybe we can avoid this to reduce the effect to the least, And another example that I can consider is that in this meeting room, in this conference room, we have, we really should thank the hard work of an interpreter. But with AI, I think such a job will be replaced by robotics, I think that this can be very real, the interpretation can be done by AI. It'll be very easy, and I think it's coming to be a reality very soon. And also, for example, for negotiation, instead of I'm coming here to talk, actually I can talk in China through video to you, right? So all these elements, I think, can be really applied to diplomacy, in my mind. Of course, for diplomacy, which is, we said it's art of negotiation, I think we cannot, completely to surrender our, this art to AI, because, AI, the working principle for AI, first is enough data. Secondly is a very definite and obvious objective. But for, for diplomacy, this objective cannot be very, clear sometimes. So, and also, like Professor Grove mentioned, 3 fallacies. I think that's really very good. maybe online we have fake news, we have some hackers, we have all kinds of black holes, so finally I think that the fourth industrial revolution is a good thing for our diplomacy, but finally it will be a combination of human beings and machines. So this is my point to answer to your point.
Well, thank you. It's like that we are dangerously getting closer to science fiction. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it's not fiction. I think it's coming real.
Of course.
Right. Yeah.
Professor Lee, could you please, when you answer, could you please combine those two dimensions to save, to be effective, time efficient? Could you please combine two dimensions?
Number two and number
the
three.
instrumental and strategic dimension.
Yeah.
The strategic dimension, just for reminder purpose, what is to be done to facilitate interstate collaboration in the fourth industrial revolution era?
Diplomacy will be diplomacy. I think the diplomats will continuously negotiate with other diplomats. They will meet other people. They will collect information. They will analyze the data. They will come up with smart strategies. Of course, they don't need to know how to dance at the Palace of Versailles, but perhaps in the future they may be wearing Google glasses or smart glasses to see whether or not the negotiating counterpart is perspiring or has hot temper, what kind of history he has, for the better negotiating strategy. Or perhaps the diplomats might be wearing some kind of helmet to prevent brain hacking. I was told that China has quite advanced technology in brain hacking. But diplomats will be diplomats. They will be negotiating at the negotiating table. But what will change is perhaps the structure of the diplomatic, the foreign ministry. For example, in the past, the peace and war was the central part of the foreign ministry. But these days, the central element of diplomacy has become public diplomacy. So we have increasingly larger and larger, public diplomacy bureau within the foreign ministry. And in the future, I think there will be a lot more importance in the functional departments rather than regional departments. Of course, the data analysis function will be also become very important. But what I would like to emphasize here is the problem of localization. In the past, we have the so-called global commodities. Global commodities are commodities like coffee, sugar, automobiles, semiconductors. If you make those commodities, you can sell them in the global market. It's one standard commodity. But in the future, I think the more you globalize, the more ironically localized you will be because of the problem of the data, local data. And artificial intelligence will analyze the local data. And then if you export, for example, a driverless vehicle to China, that vehicle will be extremely localized, reflecting upon the data, habit, preferences of the drivers, individual drivers. So the data and the artificial intelligence would be extremely important. And I think that localization would be applied to the realm of diplomacy as well. When you are, for example, contacting certain group of people in the USA, and there is a senator who's representing Foreign Relations Committee, and you want to lobby the big donors within his electorate district, then you're going to analyze those donors and the groups and the electorate district with the help of artificial intelligence, and you will customize your public diplomacy and your diplomacy in that direction with the help of the artificial intelligence. And then another problem would be the dependence of human beings on the artificial intelligence. When the physical labor is replaced by robots, the human beings will still give orders to the robots. I mean, human beings will design the softwares for the robots. But if our mental labor is going to be replaced by the robots, that they are going to make judgment, they're going to make decisions. As she said, they are, emotionless, very rational, cold guys. I don't know whether or not it's going to be female or male, but and if you depend increasingly upon the decisions and judgment of the human artificial intelligence, I bet there is going to be a reversal of the relationship between human beings and artificial intelligence. They are going to give orders and we'll be helping them. So in the future, in the past, perhaps when robots are replacing our physical labor, we have the service sectors which create a lot of employment opportunities. But if robots are replacing our mental labor, perhaps human beings will become the aid, the supporter of these artificial intelligence and robots. I think we should be very, very careful. We'll be addicted. We'll be addicted to the decisions of the artificial intelligence. About the issues, do I have some more time to discuss issues?
I would say no.
Strategies? No? No. I have a lot to say, but for the benefit of time.
Yeah, I know you always. Yeah. But please save the time. Why don't we? Now we are in the middle of a third dimension. So, but then I'm really afraid to say that running out of time. So I think we have 2 minutes per panelist. So, what is to be done to facilitate international collaboration in a new era? Do you have? Would you like to assign a particular role for that matter for Korea? Why don't we start with the Director General Kwon? What is to be done to facilitate collaboration? Yeah.
Okay. Now I'd like to point out the 3 technologies, enabling technologies that impact on the diplomatic decision making. One is data technology. How to collect quality information, quality data, and then also the size of data is very important. And the second one is blockchain technology. Is one of the I emphasize the potential of the blockchain technology. The third one is AI. AI is analyzing the data, and very important for strategic making, a strategy of diplomacy. Having said that, I think for strategic dimension, I would like to think about the agenda setting power. I think it can be some challenges, but I think fourth industrial revolution technologies can also give us the opportunities for us. Because in a digital world, everybody has the same voice, everybody has the same power. So we have some ideas. We can raise the new agenda items. So agenda setting power is important. Second one is networking power. So we can network with other countries, other stakeholders. So we can get more access to them, and we can persuade them our technologies. And third one is the thinking power, I think imagination power. Or it can be another called a storytelling power. That means even if it's a small country, if they have storytelling power, they can, they enlarge their role in diplomatic world. So the digital technology can fill the gap. So I think the 3 powers considered, then we think we need some sort of resetting our the infrastructure. One of how to invest, but the problem is money. How much money we should invest, and then we should permit some cultures, allow for the trial and errors. It is unprecedented path, so it can make some mistakes or errors. It's natural, it's inevitable, but our culture does not allow the kind of mistakes. So that kind of one of the barriers. And also we should think about one of the things that was the role of government sector. If we should realize the enabling technology into real results. Other than technology, we need business models and system operation. And fourth one is market design. But market design for economic decision-making arena, but for us, diplomatic arena, we think it can rename it as a governance setting, a rule setting. That is our work. So how to regulate or deregulate, or how to we set up a norm, as a regime, can enable or encourage the kind of digital technologies can flourish. That is our role. In a sense, I think we need more collaboration with other countries, other stakeholders. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Why don't you go over to Professor Chai? What is to be done?
Yeah, you asked me. You asked what can be done to. Okay. What can be done to facilitate the strategic collaboration? But I have to say that we have to think about what kind of collaboration we should work on first. If we are clear about what kind of collaboration we should work on, it will be very obvious that how to collaborate, facilitate the collaboration. I think that in terms of fourth industrial revolution, I think that several aspects of collaboration. First, we have to collaboratively think about the international norms, how to apply, for example, AI into even security, even into war or whatever aspect. We have to first think about the international norm. For example, in cybersecurity, we have a Tallinn manual on cyber war. But for AI, we should think about that. Secondly, we should think about how to avoid the abuse of those new technologies. For example, maybe used by terrorists. So this secondly. Thirdly, I think that we should think about we should not let the gap too big. Why is that? Because I think that the fourth industrial revolution, the author Klaus Schwab, he mentioned that the fourth industrial revolution, there are still 17% of people who are left behind. And for the third industrial revolution, half of the people in the world are still left behind. Then for the fourth industrial revolution, there will be even more who will be left behind. Why we should not let that gap too big? Because in this world, if we left behind too many people, there will be too many immigrant thing and geopolitical disabilities, things like that. So we should bring as many as countries to upward. So this is a common duty for us. I think that of course we should also avoid the this hegemony. So I think that these are the collaboration that we can work on. So how to go there? I think that of course we maybe two words can be talked about. One is share, and one is exchange or communication. Share, we should share data, because especially share data. And then secondly, I think we have to always exchange and communicate, negotiate about all these things. And for China, I think I really was interested about Alex's presentation in the morning. He mentioned that there are only 5 countries who are really big in the fourth industrial revolution, which is America, Germany, Japan, Korea, and China. So I'm really glad to see that 3 of the 5 are located in the Northeast Asia. So this really means that perhaps we can do something together. Yeah, I know that in this year's 10th BRICS Summit, which was held in South Africa, and that theme was BRICS in Africa, collaboration for inclusive growth and shared prosperity in the fourth in the fourth industrial revolution. So the theme is exactly the fourth industrial revolution. And actually for that BRICS summit, coming out of that summit, the BRICS country decided to set up a BRICS partnership on new industrial revolution. So in my mind, I think that perhaps we probably, well, this is a too bold idea. We can probably think about a Northeast partnership on the fourth industrial revolution, something like that. Some quick response, 2 minutes.
Okay. Professor Banzai, what is the problem? I mean, in the realm of cyber governance, we have contending two blocks of countries. Yeah. So, what is to be done to get advanced?
From legal on the institutional perspective and the facilitator that Professor Kim asked to us, I think the facilitator is national law to implement the international law. Many states need to establish and adopt the national laws and the international or common standard reflecting a well-informed international consensus supported by solid technical knowledge. So I think that the key factors are the capacity building and the confidence building with transparent system. These are the key factors to facilitate the international cooperation, I think. So, yeah, this is very brief, but this is my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Han, can you give us some very refreshing private sector perspective?
From a private sector, well, let me first say, I think there's really three things that really come to the forefront. I mean, like Professor Lee.
Just in 2 minutes, okay?
Yeah, there's so much, but I just want to distill it down to just three. And one of those things is to really shape the conversation about technology into an enabler of what we're trying to all collectively aim for. And I've used the word human well-being, maybe just as a banner, but I think we need to shape the conversation around how can we pursue a common vision and what are our common values as nations and as nation actors. And from a private sector perspective, and I think this will be refreshing for you to hear, a company like SAP, which by the way is in over 130 countries, so we're like a large country in a way with lots of stations all over. We have instituted an ethical code for artificial intelligence, talking about what we will do, what we will not do. And this is something that we publicize in our corporate portal, so you can see that. Taking steps like that is of ultimate importance as a very influential institution. The second thing, besides looking at technology as an enabler of our common goals, is the topic of data and privacy. As human beings, we want the benefit of what big data offers us, but we don't want to lose our privacy. I mean, it's human dignity that's at stake here. And so a company like ours, as well as many other companies, are upholding GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. And this is something that is, I think, of utmost importance for all companies and all governments who are collecting lots of data to uphold. And lastly, I think I would just leave with the remark that trust is of utmost importance. And whether it be trust between robots and humans, because that's a matter of trust as well, or between humans and humans, and certainly between nations and nations. How do we allow technology to help us to build the trust that's necessary so that we can pursue the common goals and the common vision for this human well-being that I hope, is the central conversation that diplomats are having in the international stage today.
I personally believe that the last issue we raised, I think, is a very important issue on which we have to keep pondering and contemplate in the coming probably months, if not years. Okay, we're going to open.
I was given just 2 chances.
All right, yeah. Please, I'm sorry.
I'll just, I spent just 2 minutes. One is, as I said, the world is going to be bifurcated into 2 different digital network economic blocks. And it's like Android versus iOS, or Google versus Apple. And once you are a Google person, it's very difficult to be an Apple person because you are connected to a certain network. And I think the question or the problem, challenges for the states in the future is going to be, how to make these Apple people and Google people friends, rather than these are incompatible networks. But we need to make these 2 groups of people friends rather than enemies. I think that is going to happen. That challenge is going to emerge as the U.S. is giving pressure to its alliance partners, to adopt the American standard, to join the American network. That is going to happen. So the alliance will be economic alliance will be cyber alliance, and China bloc versus the rest of the bloc. Whether or not we can make these 2 blocks, even if they are incompatible, enemies or friends, I think that's going to be a real challenge.
Thank you. We now open the floor, but forgive me, we just have a couple of minutes, so we're gonna have like a couple of questions from the floor. Any volunteer? No? Yeah, Professor Lee Hyo-young from Korea National Diplomatic Academy.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to ask questions. I'd like to place my questions to Dr. Han. I think that his perspective from the business world is very important, because although all these talks about government roles and diplomacy, I think that we need to take into account the real world, because the business people are actually doing the job in making money and making things happen. And so my question is, you talked about regulations, and I was curious, what kind of regulations are solution providers like SAP and other businesses were doing the actual things in this digital technology, world of new digital technology, faced with? What kind of regulations do you think are most important that need to be deregulated in order to make this new technology environment actually feasible? And my second question is, there's a lot of talk about international collaboration, need for collaboration. And in science technology, in the field of science and technology, one form of collaboration could be joint R&D in developing new technologies. And I think that since a lot of resources and money is needed to develop new technologies, an important form of collaboration could be joint R&D. And from the business perspective, I'm curious if this is really feasible, because developing new technology involves a lot of IPR, intellectual property. And I'm curious if there could be this collision between the protection of IPR versus developing new technology. Thank you.
Do we have 2 hours? No. Let me just very briefly answer your questions. And I'm going to start with the second one about joint R&D. As you pointed out, the expected outcome of R&D is intellectual property. And in the case of the software industry, you can't get more sensitive about intellectual property than, I think, software. And so joint research we have co-innovation projects, but typically it's stated up front who will own that IP. And so without getting into too much specifics, that sort of legal agreement is always in place prior to such joint efforts with any companies. With regard to regulations, I don't want to list off any specific ones. I think it's also a very political issue as well. But let me go back to the small example I gave you about the taxi drivers versus the carpool proponents. When you look into that situation and say, well, what are the regulations that may be relevant here? Well, having now lived in Korea and in Seoul for the last 5 years, and I'm a heavy user of taxis, by the way, because I used to drive in the US, but after I came here, I realized taxis are so inexpensive and public transportation is so good, I can live without having a car. So I've been taking taxis a lot. What I've noticed, though, is that it's sometimes difficult to get a taxi late at night. Yeah. Now, it's just a fact, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why there are so many people who are sort of angry about this whole taxi industry, because they can't get taxis late at night. Well, I know a company that is currently sort of working on this particular domain, and they're telling me that taxi companies have parking lots full of cars that are sitting idle. Like I mentioned, this is underutilized assets. Okay. Now, what would it take for young people who are perhaps without a job right now, who would like to work, who are able to drive, to work part-time from the hours of, say, 11 p.m. to 2, 3 in the morning, where there's an enormous imbalance between demand and supply of taxis? Okay. What kind of regulations need to be loosened in order to allow for such young people to be able to legally step into this role? And this is not something that they may make a career out of, but they may like to do this for a period of a year, perhaps. And it could circulate between young people who are doing this as a sort of a stepping stone to other things. Okay. So this is just a very small but real example of how government needs to be able to allow for such innovations to happen in very mundane industries like the tax industry. And there are many, many more, of course.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not sure we actually have fulfilled the task, the mission assigned to us to this collective panel. But then I'm pretty sure that this will be a great launchpad that will pave the way toward forging a solid epistemic community on the issue, the intersection between technology, new technologies and diplomacy. And I would like to assure that the KNDA will be committed. Is it okay for me to say that, President Kim? Yeah, he says, okay. So thank you very much again, and please join me thanking our distinguished panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kim, and all panelists for facilitating and participating in this intriguing and enthusiastic discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them another round of applause to wrap up our conference. 이상으로 2018 IFANS 국제문제회의를 마치겠습니다. 여러분께 유익한 시간이 되셨길 바라며 끝까지 자리를 지켜주신 참석자 여러분들께 진심으로 감사드립니다. 앞으로도 IFANS 국제문제회의에 지속적인 관심 부탁드리겠습니다. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the 2018 IFANS Conference on Global Affairs. Thank you for staying with us throughout today's conference. I hope that all of you return home with meaningful takeaways from today's gathering and continue to contribute to our future-oriented annual efforts. 추가로 안내사항 말씀드리겠습니다. 사전 등록 후 페이스북 이벤트에 참여하신 분들께서는 기념품을 제공해드립니다. 회의장 밖 등록 데스크에서 이벤트 참여를 인증해 주시면 확인 후 기념품을 제공해 드리도록 하겠습니다. And for Facebook event participants, please go to the registration desk and show our staff your confirmation and participation in the event to get a special gift from the KNDA. 마찬가지로 참가 확인서가 필요하신 분들께서도 등록 데스크에서 받아가시길 바라며 통역 수신기는 나가시는 회의장 문 앞에 반납 부탁드리겠습니다. If you need a confirmation letter of your participation in today's conference, please go to the registration desk. And please return your simultaneous interpretation receiver in front of the door of this conference hall. 감사합니다. 안녕히 돌아가십시오. Thank you very much and enjoy your evening.